As withdrawn and removed from your world as I am, something was brought to my attention recently, which I would imagine has probably long since become old news, common knowledge, business as usual to the majority of you, and yet came as a complete surprise to me. And this is all the more so ironic, inasmuch as it entails a comparatively small group of individuals who themselves are even more withdrawn and removed than I am from the rest of the world. Withdrawn, removed, not merely unattached, but completely detached from the entire globe. If you were to travel around the world, all the way to India, beyond the Bay of Bengal, and into the Andaman Sea, you would there locate the Andaman Islands, amongst which you would find North Sentinel Island. Yes, as I say, you are probably already well aware of this, but for those of you who do not know, North Sentinel Island apparently is the home of the last, but not lost, tribe of completely uncontacted people. Individuals who comprise a micro-society, which is somehow, for generations or perhaps even for centuries, we may never know, managed to retain an insulated, isolated independence from the rest of the earth. And they retain and safeguard that solidarity with an intensively violent hostility toward the outsiders which they deem the rest of the world to be. In short, all of you. Therefore, they remain uncontacted, uncorrupted, uncontaminated by the rest of the world. And of course, the existence of such a thing presents an irresistible challenge to the rest of the world, who simply cannot allow such a phenomenon to go unmolested. Oh, the reasons are all rationalized, the motivations are endless, anthropological, sociological, National Geographical, in the interest of science, and of course that old standby, ecumenical, religious, biblical, missionary-based contact. Now, on a brief but important note of practicality, it has almost universally been agreed upon that in speaking of contamination, if, hypothetically, an outsider were to set foot on this island and interact with the inhabitants, they would be exposing said inhabitants to all manners of microbes and germs and illnesses and viruses, the likes of which have never been known on that island, and would undoubtedly wind up killing the inhabitants. And yet, the motivations persist. The most recent, I'm given to understand, involved a well-intentioned but ultimately ill-fated young missionary representing a Baptist congregation, to no surprise, who was determined to save the heathen souls inhabiting North Sentinel Island. And he died in the process. He was ultimately killed. Now, this is a tragedy, and I am not unsympathetic, but whenever the missionary question comes to the fore, I am always put in mind of an excerpt from a book detailing an interaction between a white preacher and a tribal chieftain of Amerindian origin, First Nation, real people, Indians, Native Americans, as some of you know them to be. The interaction between the tribal chief and the black coats. Do you remember they used to call the missionaries that? Because of the hassocks that they would wear, black coats. The discourse between the chief and the preacher. The preacher talked about sin too, says if I sin, I go to hell. I burn for all time in hot fires. I say to the preacher, I do not know about sin. The preacher says, I will tell you about sin. I say to the preacher, if I do not know about sin, will I still have to go to hell? Will I still burn? The preacher says, no. If you do not know about sin, you will not go to hell. So I say to the preacher, don't tell me then. An oversimplification, of course, and yet that is the upshot. And yet here and again, I am not telling you anything which you do not already know. The main point of this editorial, believe it or not, is syntactical. Would you believe, oh yes, you should believe, since you're the ones who came up with this, that the inhabitants of this island are referred to as the North Sentinel-ese. The North Sentinel-ese? North Sentinel-ese? That sounds awful. That sounds so discordant and disharmonious. That's terrible. The North Sentinel-ese? That was probably dreamed up by the same geniuses who conjured up COVID-19. North Sentinel-ese. That sounds horrific. Therefore, it is my edict that henceforth the inhabitants of North Sentinel Island will forevermore be known as the North Sentinel Islanders. The North Sentinel Islanders. Now that sounds classy. And more to the point, it lends that degree, that edge of formality and respect and dignity, which in turn will serve to safeguard and retain the tribal autonomy of the inhabitants of that micro-colony for all time to come. The motivations, of course, they continue unbounding. Sooner or later, someone is going to attempt yet again, although you would think that the standoff would serve as a lasting deterrent and an everlasting lesson to the outsiders. Now, I do not know what school of thought is currently underway. Again, be it scientific, anthropological, sociological, and again back to biblical ecumenicalism and evangelism. I do not know what the missionary position on this issue is today, and frankly I do not care, because the upshot and the bottom line is quite simple. The question and the answer are rhetorically one and the same. When it comes to the North Sentinel Islanders and that safe and sweet haven which they have created for themselves, leave them the hell alone!